This is a conversation that I had yesterday, and unlike most of my videos, which I do really off the top of my head, I practiced this a little bit because I have to omit some names and times and dates and places and things like that to tell this story. And it's a really convoluted kind of a story, kind of a Norm Macdonald thing, except it's not funny, that does have a point, so bear with me. So what I'm bringing up here is that in the practicing part of this, it sounded to me in my head like, one, I was saying that you can't make a bridle horse if you're not a ranch cowboy. And so if it sounds like that, that's not what I mean. And two, it also kind of sounded to me like I was maybe saying, I'm the only one with the right information here, don't listen to everybody else. That's not what I'm trying to say either. There's something real specific about Hackamores I'm trying to say. And so bear with me, and even if it sounds like I'm saying something else, there's a real point to this. The point is just go ahead and come through and we'll just edit it. Okay, so those were the disclaimers. I'll get on with what I'm actually here to talk about. So I've got an old friend, cowboy friend, and he's not an old friend like I've known him for years and years. He's an old friend in the sense that he's older than me. And we converse on the phone from time to time. He calls me, because I don't call anybody. He calls me and we chit-chat and shoot the bull and whatever the deal is. And so here the other day he called me, and I'm going to give him a name. This isn't his name. I'm going to call him Bob. So Bob calls me, and we're chitting and chatting, and we have cool conversations, really cool conversations. He's led a neat life. So part of our conversation was the winter he spent in Estes Park selling mushrooms to hippies and this and that. And we had a, long conversation about honesty and personal morality and spirits and God and things like that. And then, of course, being that we're human, as soon as we're done speaking about morality, we had to gossip a little bit. So we were gossiping around. And it's a funny thing about the cowboy world. It's kind of like the Cowboy Express. If I rope a bull in Texas, everybody in Oregon will know about it by breakfast tomorrow. If it was a wreck, if it was successful, nobody will know about it. And so we're talking about different people we know and this and that. And he says, "Hey, what about that guy, old so and so? He does clinics and purports to be a bridle horse man and this and that." And he says, "Do you know him?" And I said, "Yeah, I know that guy." I said, "He's none of that stuff's true. He's never worked on a ranch anywhere. So-and-so is his stepdad, and so-and-so is his step-uncle, and there's where we pick this information up, and blah, blah, blah." And, when he put on a flat hat and decided to start being a clinician, he sat down with so-and-so and took notes, all this etiquette stuff you're supposed to know, blah, blah, blah. I said, "I know the guy." I said, "He's a pretty good guy, and he's actually a pretty good horse trainer." But like he'd show up at Brandon's when I was at XYZ Ranch, and, he'd show up with rubber on his horn and ball cap on, going to go to a team roping after the Brandon, and he had a real job. I said, all that stuff about being a cowboy is nonsense. That's just a lie he made up to sell his clinics. Like I said, but his horses are pretty good. And this Bob that I'm talking to said, "Yeah, but his bridle horse is just, there's something about him that's not right." And I said, "Yeah, they're good. They do what they're supposed to. You can go ride them, but I said they're not. I said I can't really put my finger on what it is, but they're not bridle horses. There's something a little bit dishonest about them." And so we keep talking and this and that, and another name comes up of another person that does clinics and stuff like that and promotes the old California traditions. And I said, I met that guy once, but I don't really know him. And this Bob, he says, "Oh, I know him. He was around." And he says he really did work on ranches, but only when he heard that Western Horseman was going to be there, he'd hire on. And then as soon as Western Horseman left, he'd quit. He had a real job too. He says, "Yeah, he's a fake." And again, we both agreed that we both had times when the best horse we had wasn't as good as what he was riding. But again, we agreed that there was just something missing about his bridle horses. They just weren't real. And so this is the part where I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying if you haven't really worked on a ranch, you can't make a bridle horse. Because one of the best bridle horses I've ever rode was made by a gal that's a structural engineer. And at the time, she was living in New York. She's from New York. Made as good bridle horses I've ever rode. So the ranch cowboy part didn't have anything to do with it. It was just the fact that these two guys that claim a history that isn't true, their bridle horses just weren't right. Yeah, whatever. So we go on gossiping about this and that and other things, and then talking about other things. And then Bob, he mentions something that Arnold Rojas had said to him. And I said, man, you knew Rojas? I said, gosh dang, I've heard so many cool stories about him that I really wish I would have met him. And he says, Brett, I am the dumbest SOB that you have ever met. He says, I'm the dumbest SOB I ever met. He says, I lived with Rojas and I never stopped to ask him anything, never stopped to think about who I was with and to ask him anything. And the short story of the long version of the story is Bob was a runaway. He ran away from home at 12 years old and went to working on ranches. And he was, I don't know how old at the point that this all went down. I didn't ask him, but he got all banged up, was out of a job, and was the only place he knew to go was the saddle shop. And he was in Raton, New Mexico. And so he was bumming there at the saddle shop in Raton, and they were feeding him, and like he had a broken leg and stuff like that. And so back to the Cowboy Express I was talking about, word got out, and Rojas called. Rojas didn't know this kid, but he heard about him, called, and they said, yeah, this kid's living in the corner over here at the saddle shop. So Arnold drives all the way from wherever he lived in California, I don't know where he lived, all the way out to Raton, and picks this friend of mine up, takes him home, and heals him up and everything like that. And they fed him, and he lived with them. They kind of adopted him until the little, runaway's a runaway. So he got his hitchhiking finger got itchy, and off he went again. And so he said, yeah, I was living with Rojas and his family, and I was around all these other buckaroos and old famous bit makers and this and that. And he says, and they all liked me because every buckaroo loves a little lost runaway cowboy. I mean, we do. And he says, they all liked me, and they were all friendly to me. And he said, they would have told me anything I asked him. He said, but shoot, I was just a little kid. I never thought to ask him anything. And so we both kind of went on about what a shame it was that he never asked. And here I've got to get my notebook out because I wrote down what he said. So he said, the only thing that I actually remember Arnold telling me, and he said it in Spanish, and word for word it translates to, no hackamore maker in the world can build a hackamore that will work for a man with an unpure heart. That's what it translates to word for word. And so he said it to me in Spanish, I said it back in English, and he says, yeah, that's the literal translation. He says, but what it meant to me at the time, I guess Arnold said this to him and then handed him a snaffle bit that he had made for Bob. He said, since he handed me that snaffle bit, he said, what it meant for me at the time, it meant that men's hearts are too fickle to use a hackamore correctly, and that he had to go into the iron. My friend Bob had to go into the Iron Age to learn how a horse worked correctly, to be able to use all the power in a hackamore correctly. And so one of the great things about talking to Bob is you can have those long silences where you think about stuff. And I had one of those long silences, and I said, those two guys we were talking about half an hour ago and how their bridle horses weren't right? And he said, yeah. I said, they're spade bit crusaders. They are absolutely no snaffle bit, ever kind of guys. And he says, yeah, you're right. And I said, that's why their bridle horses are not quite just right. I can finally put my finger on it. It's because they have an unpure heart. They're dishonest about what they're doing. And that's why the hackamore doesn't work right for them. Consequently, they can't make a bridle horse correct. And so that was just really profound to me, and I thought I would share it with you, those of you out there, those of you that are Hackamore enthusiasts, but also those of you that aren't necessarily. It's still something to think about. If you're lying about yourself, then you're also lying to that horse, and that horse will lie back. So that's all that video was about.
I want to thank the subscribers of our Patreon channel. The patrons, that's Patron where I'm from, give us the opportunity to bring these videos to you all. Without them, this channel wouldn't be possible. Join us over on Patreon for more in-depth lessons and step-by-step instruction on everything from gear to theory, riding everything from colts to bridle horses, the circus pole, and husbandry. We'd love to see you all over there.